Double programming is really old school. We don't need to continue using training wheels to ride our bicycle. That's what we're kind of doing with double programming.
I don't know any statistical programmer that says, "Yoo-hoo, I will do double programming today."
Double programming just has fundamental flaws, that it is really a process that forces people to work separately from one another. The proper solution to that, from my perspective, is what we've been working on, which is code traceability. Then the review becomes so quick and so efficient that really should introduce a paradigm shift.
For SDTMs, it's the standardization process of creating SDTMs and the training and understanding of that. And it's based off of code.
If you do code traceability, you also enable other people to understand what is going on.
It greatly enables, communication with management across the teams, with statisticians, with clinicians.
This is why I think that we should rethink the whole concept of building trusts rather than validation.
We're using the word validation, but just because you do double programming doesn't make anything valid. Two things that are wrong are still wrong.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Verisian Community Podcast. Today is a bit of a special episode because I've invited my co-founder, Henning Kuich, to the episode, and also our two strategic advisors, Richard and Sunil. And we want to discuss a white paper that we've just released. And the white paper talks about how validation in statistical programming should change using our products that we're building here at Verisian. And we're going to be talking about why in 10 years' time, we don't think double programming will be the gold standard in validation and how we could get there. We're sharing our strong opinions here, and we want to be opinionated about these topics. And if you want to discuss with us, feel free to post your comments in the comment section or reach out to us privately. We look forward to a good discussion, and I hope you enjoy this. Gentlemen, it's been a while that we had everyone on the podcast, and certainly this is the first time we have 4 people on the podcast. And let me first introduce everyone. So firstly, I'm very pleased to welcome my co-founder and partner, Henning Kuich, to the episode. He's the CTO and co-founder of Verisian. I'm also very pleased to introduce and welcome Richard, who was on an earlier episode last year, and he works with us as a strategic advisor. And finally, Sunil Gupta, who is also a strategic advisor to our company. So, gentlemen, firstly, Sunil, we're meeting each other next week, and you're obviously in LA, and we're finally meeting in LA in person for the conference. So I'm excited to see you there, and Henning and Richard are dialing in from Berlin. So today's purpose of the podcast, the episode, and the reason I want everyone to join is because we want to talk about a message that we're starting to spread. And there's a white paper available for anyone that wants to read about this in detail. But we want to talk about validation and QC in clinical trials, statistical programming specifically. And I want to start with you, Henning, of course, because we started this company a year and a half ago. And can you tell us a little bit about how we ended up with effectively the stuff we wrote in the white paper? Let's start there.
Yeah, so how did we end up there? I think at the beginning, what we had was this idea of code traceability, and that it makes the analyses much more transparent. It's much easier to figure out what was done, exactly how it was done. And then I think the most natural application of that is to look at analyses that have been done and to validate that they are in accordance with specs and that they are, from a content perspective, actually doing the right thing, producing the right data, and ultimately producing the correct outputs. So I think it's the most natural application of what we've built. And of course, we started with code traceability, but we're now linking that up with the data so that you can seamlessly not just look at the code, but you can switch between what is the original raw data, what code works on that to produce derivative data, what does that derivative data look like, and so on, all the way from raw data to outputs, the TLFs in this case. And so that was the beginning, and this is the most natural application of it.
And I want to recall a bit of an inside story that not many people know. So Richard, you obviously were at Bayer for almost 30 years. And so when we started, even before we started the company, we were pitching this idea to you. Can you tell us a little bit about, both your experience in QC in general, and more specifically, I guess your first thoughts on our approach and how it developed since?
I remember actually you were introduced to me by some colleagues, and as a VP, I sat in some meetings, and I had honestly a hard time understanding what this was all about. What is the value of what you were doing? Now I understand the code traceability concept. I like that instantly, but then knowing the idea and seeing the potential use cases, that was a different story. So it took me a while to get it, right? But then I got to know you both of you, had lots of discussion. I remember about why it could be a good idea or not so a good idea, but finally I realized if you really have good code traceability, that could be a real game changer in how we look at the flow of our work in clinical trials, right? If you think about it, you have the data, you do something with it, and then you end up with time and resources, right? There are a lot of programs involved in analyzing in clinical trials. Very often during clinical trials is run, lots and lots and lots of programmers are already working on the concepts, on the creation of the data that then statisticians or also programmers can use for inferences around the clinical trial. And knowing that the concepts that you thought about in the beginning of the trial, before you run the trial, making sure that these concepts are done right, that is something unique about this code traceability, in this code traceability approach, right? We do double programming, coming to the core of the issue. We do double programming, and of course we do double programming because we need to make sure that whatever we produce is acceptable, is correct, right? But if you think about how double programming works and how code traceability works, it didn't take too long for me to understand the advantages that code traceability have. Making sure that the concepts that you have in a clinical trial are implemented correctly. I think that's the major part.
So I think that's so cool to hear, firstly, because it's been a journey for us as a company to communicate that value. And so it's sort of really cool to be able to ask this question now, sort of a year and a half into the journey. And that's exactly why I want to go to Sunil as well, because we met for the first time in end of August 2023 in Foster City in Silicon Valley. And we were both presenters and we both sat on a panel at one of the Fuse SDEs. Can you tell us and share with the audience a little bit about what was your experience, similar to Richard, first impressions, and how we sort of ended up here talking in this podcast?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I do remember that event. It was a few single day event, and I was one of the co-chairs for that. And we were definitely on the panel. Putting that your presentation, I was intrigued with the concept that you provided. Being in the industry for 3 decades, I embrace language. I'm a programmer at heart. I understand logic. I understand how to work with data, and I can do things with the data. And so I was very comfortable enabling being a power user of SAS for all these years. And then when you came up with the presentation of code traceability, it intrigued me. Out of my curiosity, I was very curious as to how this was possible, because many things I've been doing, of course, manually. There's many techniques of using metadata, but I was very intrigued to learn more about your tool and technology. And since then, we've had various conversations, and I've always wanted to learn. And the demos that you've shared, you and Henning shared with me each time we reviewed updates, I thought, okay, this is pretty nice. I see, one aspect that it can contribute to. But slowly, as we developed and had a better understanding, I saw that you were able to actually impact, not just one area of clinical trials, improving the process, but actually end to end, because this technology is such that it enables programmers who have subject matter expertise to do more than what they've been doing manually or what they've been developing to help, with the things that they need to do. So I've been really impressed. And my goal is to incorporate best practices. I think that, whenever I'm working with clients looking to, leverage best practices. So having standard control, mentoring people and showing the best way to get from point A to point B. And then in our case, for SDTMs, it's the standardization process of creating SDTMs and the training and understanding of that. And it's based off of code, code that's very reliable and code connecting the raw data, to the SDTMs that are produced. And what I really like about the tool and this, process that we're going through, it really streamlines. You have the raw data in its unstructured, unstandard form. That message, that content the conclusion is not changed. That is transferred over to SDTM as standardized, and is in a way that makes it easier to understand and get that message across to the regulatory, review. And so I think, making that very easy, transparent, and co-transparability is really helpful.
You mentioned the programmers that you help, right? But it's not only the programmers, right? If you do code traceability the way and visualize it the way that Tomás and his team is doing, you also enable other people to understand what is going on, right? And understand, how certain aspects of the data are derived from the raw data, and making sure that you have the data flow really throughout the program. And I think that's so important, right? It's not restricted to the programmers. It will help the whole team to understand what is going on in your data.
Yep, I totally agree. In fact, I forgot to mention one important aspect: the visualization. As a programmer, I'm always seeing syntax, in a programming environment. But with the platform that's being developed over here, now you incorporate visualization, and just like you're saying, Richard, I totally agree with that. It greatly enables communication with management across the teams, with statisticians, with clinicians, so that they can see in real time the things that as programmers we develop output for, but they can actually see it through a visualization, so you have much more engagement, interaction. So yep, I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe feeding off of those two statements or three, to cycle back to the original question, where did we start and how did we end up here? I think this was a very nice summary from your guys' perspective, which was that we started with this layer which was more focused on the technology itself necessarily because we had to develop it to get to a point to be able to show others what we're trying to say. And for a lot of time, we're trying to communicate things which we weren't able to visually show yet. And the major transition now has simply been that the technological layer is now stable and so well developed that we can move from something that we present and people say, oh, that is very interesting, that could be useful, to using it and applying it to a very specific process, which is this validation. So it's now turning from something that is very interesting to look at to actually covering and replacing a process which everyone needs to do. And so I think that is the major transition that has been happening over the last few months, that it's really becoming a product that has immediate application to something, to a standardized process that everyone has to go through in clinical trials.
So that's actually a really good segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is, I want to start with you, Henning. Give me your opinion. I mean, I know it, but give the audience your opinion on double programming on just generally, is double programming, what is it? What do you think of it unfiltered? And then I want Richard and Sunil to give their opinion on that, but specifically also how people think in the industry, and especially your experience. So let's start with you, Henning. What do you think of double programming as a computer scientist looking at it?
I think I'm going to give a completely different perspective, which is probably what you're fishing for here, which is that the idea is extremely foreign to me if I come at it from the perspective of a computer scientist or a software engineer. Because the way software engineering works is, and this is how all of open source works, is that you program whatever you're responsible for, and then you put up a PR, which is just, it's called a pull request. It doesn't really matter what it's called. And then the process is that many other people review it, with the idea that the more eyes and brains you have on the problem, the more feedback you become, and the more feedback you get. And that process doesn't end there, actually. That's the beginning of it. So putting it up for review to as many people as possible, and then getting that review is step one. Step two is that you then are in an environment and in a platform that allows you to quickly iterate. So the golden road to quality, from my perspective, is iteration, because you can't ever predict exactly everything that's going to happen. You're always going to have assumptions that you just have in your brain when you program something. It's just the way it is. And it's actually exceptionally rare that you think of all problems in advance and you sort of solve everything. Usually what happens is you write something that sort of works. Then, you give it to the first user, they crash it in 100 different ways you never thought of, and then you iterate and you iterate. So the proper way of getting to quality as quickly as possible is that you produce something, you get quick feedback, you have a lot of smart people looking at it, and you get to iterate quickly. And so that is the software engineering view. This is how open source works. This is how we develop our software. It's how everyone develops software. The reason why that's much more difficult in data science is because the link between data and the code is just much tighter. So it's much more about assumptions that are in the data that you just don't only see in the code. So in software engineering, you usually have a very good idea of the data. It's extremely well structured and so on. So the review process is more difficult. But rather than taking that and then going towards double programming, where two people independently program towards the same result, let's say, and then if that result is identical, your assumption is because there's two different people that did it in their own way and the result is the same, therefore it's valid, just has fundamental flaws which you can't argue away. And that is, people can similarly misunderstand the specifications or what this thing is about. They can make logical mistakes that are very, very similar. You need to have some way of comparing the two outputs to be able to say whether or not they're the same, which means that you have to at some point compare and you have to at some point talk about it. And then the whole idea of it being completely independent sort of becomes questionable. And on top of that, of course, it's just a process which takes a tremendous amount of time and resources because it's at least two people doing it. And if they don't agree, then you're sort of messing with two code bases in order to get to the point that they do agree. But the thing that bothers me most fundamentally about it is that it is really a process that forces people to work separately from one another. And here's another huge lesson from open source, is that the best training you get is from people who are more senior and who have much more experience. And what you want is you want that experience, you want that feedback as you're developing things. So not like after the study is done and then, let's do a big code review, but you want to have these challenges as you're building stuff up. This is how you learn architecture. This is how you learn to properly structure your analyses. And this just gets lost. And so I do understand where it's coming from because of this really deep connection between data and the code. Reviewing data analysis code is much more difficult. But the proper solution to that, from my perspective, is what we've been working on, which is code traceability, where you see the data, the code that transforms it, and the resulting transformations, and you can go through these step by step, which means we've talked about code traceability a lot. But this is just the beginning concept, but because what you do is you use the code to link up all the data, you link up all the metadata, because it is really the thing that connects everything. It produces the output. It starts at the beginning. It connects all the metadata. And so when you have that, really what we're saying is you're using the code as an entry point to be able to understand what is the raw data, how is it processed, where does it go exactly, how does it go there, how do you produce the results from there. And if you can have that, and you can review it extremely quickly with these things that we do where we filter down all the lines of code in a program just to the ones that are relevant for the variable you're currently interested in, for example, then the review becomes so quick and so efficient. I would actually argue now easier and faster and more efficient than your average software review, that you no longer have that excuse. And at that point, the question just becomes, why would you not do it? Because you now no longer have two code bases. You don't have people working independently of each other. You don't have this separation of, let's say, your leads not talking to the person who's doing the validation programming because they shouldn't. But you can now restructure the process so that as people develop code, the whole team looks at it, the whole team gives feedback, which not only improves the code as it's being written, but also it creates this way to disseminate knowledge across your organization. So you get free training. And why wouldn't you train for free your workforce, because again, ultimately, the people who are producing quality and are ensuring quality are the people who are doing the analyses. There's no one else there. And the better they understand what they're doing, the better they do the things that they're doing, the higher the quality is going to be necessarily. So it's just, there's an introduction of a new technology which allows you to do things which were not possible before. And that really should introduce a paradigm shift in how we validate the analyses.
What do you think, Richard?
I've been in drug development all my life, basically, right? All my adult life. And when you talk about software development, I never thought of what I was doing. And in my early days, I did a lot of programming as well. I never thought about this as software development. I just needed to translate the data that we got from our clinical trials into something comprehensible so that we can make a decision out of this. And so my goal was not to create software. My goal was to create results and make sure that we have enough trust in these results to be able to make the decisions, right? And it's the same for regulatory authorities, I would guess, right? So the question to me is not how do we optimize a software development process. The question to me is how do we increase the trust? How do we make sure that we trust the results that we then provide to the authorities? And ultimately, we have these drugs for the patients, right? So how do we make sure that these drugs work? These drugs are not harmful. That to me is the greater good behind this all. And because there's no other way, we do double programming. It's just one way to solve that issue. And it's a very expensive way to solve it. It's even an inadequate way to solve it. I completely agree with what Henning said before. I think that now is the time where we have to step back for a second and say, okay, so how can we do things differently? Make it faster. If you look at the process also, how can we make the whole process better, right? Over time, how can we do this without having to resort to double programming, right? Because not only that, all the aspects that Henning said, but from experience also what you do is you do double programming so everything works. And I think Sunil knows way better than I do. But in the end, then the database is closed, you run your analyses, and something goes wrong. And why does it go wrong? Because there's something in the data that you didn't think of, right? And then you have to do the whole process actually again, which takes, again, a lot of time, and that time is really on the critical path there, right? So, so this is why I think that we should rethink the whole concept of building trust rather than validation. Yeah, it's all about building trust, and we have to come up with new methods. That's one thing. The other thing, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but the other thing is that if you want to include people in your team, right? It's really difficult if you're new in a team and if you're new into a specific clinical program to understand what was done. Yeah, so you have to read the SAP, you have to read the protocol. You want to make sure that you really understand what is going on. Having something that visualizes this process, visualizing what has been going on, will create a much faster onboarding experience, a much better onboarding experience for people that come into the project to help out, or come into the project late. And we all know how it is just before a submission, right? Everyone is scrambling for resources, and being able to have these resources available at a later point in time than you would have to if you don't have this visualization is also worth a lot.
I just add on to that. I totally agree. I've been in this industry for 3 decades. Double programming is really old school, and the concept behind it makes sense. everybody, in this field, we want to minimize the risk of producing something that's incorrect, incomplete, based on various sources. And at that time, but I think the message has been lost. It goes back to quality specifications, which I don't think many organizations spend the time to do. I think programmers are focused on just trying to match what they've produced, and without having audit trail traceability based on the specifications, having clean and organized specifications, which requires some upfront work. And so, organizations have put together some SOPs to help reduce risk, but and we're at a stage, CDISC is not new. CDISC was introduced. When it was introduced, it was a revolutionary concept. It required a lot of, changes in the way things were being done, which forced industry to focus on standardization. So that of course not only helped the review process streamline that, but internally within pharmaceutical companies, with the sponsors and CROs, it forced them to say, okay, let's have some tighter control on what domains we produce, what variables we produce, what values are valid control terminology values. So we're at a point where we actually have some maturity, that organizations have developed some systems, some macros using metadata as much as possible. And so I kind of make an analogy to riding a bicycle. We don't need to continue using training wheels to ride our bicycle. That's what we're kind of doing with double programming. We're restricting ourselves to reproduce, SDTMs, which organizations have so much experience producing by now. They should be very comfortable producing it. There's no real need to do double programming. So I think we can use that resource in a much better way to do this. And the timing of this is really good, because now we have, not just regular methods of eliminating double programming, but a visualization way to ensure that with complete code traceability and the end-to-end process, where you're linking, as Henning mentioned, with the raw data, with the code, with the results, and with the specifications. Wherever possible, I was encouraged to make use of specifications, and specifications need to be very complete, very comprehensive, so it's very straightforward. And I think, with this technology and a new way of looking at things, we're going to be much better off. We can do more with the resources that we do have. We encourage more engagement across the department, and we can let go of old things, that really don't work as well as we should, what has the right intention and everything, and still, achieve better results. So I think we're at a point where we should make the transition to eliminate double programming and provide higher quality deliverables, whether it's SDTMs, atoms, or TLGs, that convey the same message as far as the conclusion results of a study.
But it does require a different thinking, right? So I did two posts on LinkedIn about double programming, and
those are quite popular. Those posts,
yeah, they've got quite some comments, both publicly and also privately, where some people completely agreed. Some people say, no, we can't get away with double programming, because the only way to guarantee validity and guarantee correctness, so to say, I'm not even saying validity, but correctness, it's going to mean that people have to start changing their minds about how we really have to change the way we work in statistical programming, in the whole data sphere of clinical development.
Because can I add a quick question? Well, in your point, can I add a question as you're responding to this? And it may not make me popular with CROs, but it is the truth. To what extent is the elimination of double programming a threat to CROs who already have tight margins and the rest?
I'm sure that double programming is just a cost, basically, right? And they will pass this cost on to whoever they provide their service to. I think that also with respect to working with CROs, we need to change, right? So instead of saying that they basically provide a service, we will tell them what to do and they will deliver it, right? Many of the CROs have extensive experience that many, especially smaller pharma companies or biotech companies, don't have, right? So why not work with that experience, with that expertise, rather than just selling hours? I think that as I said, you need to change the way we look at things. Absolutely.
I think, add on to that, if I may, it's not that, again, the intent behind double programming is to ensure that we have validated results. So instead of doing the double programming, the focus more is, as Richard was saying, a different way of doing things. So having a good idea of what the focus of the tables are. It's in addition to adding checks, that systems can do, programs, things can do. So there's a checklist of things that can be provided. So the initial programming is not just still the initial way that was being done. It's a different way of doing it. It's enhancing, not just writing the code, but there's some things to assure that what you're producing is validated. So you do the self-internal validation, but what I consider to be program assisted, so it's not, you do have that confidence that what you're producing as the original source programmer is validated, not necessarily completely double programmed. So I just wanted to add that.
Now, you have to ask yourself, right? You mentioned already the CDIS. So we have more or less standardized data structures, and we all know that there are some things more difficult than you would think, right? But so you have a standardized input, more or less, right? Then you mentioned that many companies have a set of macros, right? So you run these, and then we tend to have standardized output. Right, so people know what to expect. Like table libraries, figure libraries, etc., depending on the indication that you're working on. Now, the discussion that I've been having in my past jobs was, okay, so we have standards here, we have standard macros, and we have standard outputs. Right, so it's all standard. Why do we need so many people working on a clinical trial then? Right, and it's a fair question. And again, it's just not very cost effective what we're doing, and that is not cost effective with respect to money, with respect to people's time, but also time for patients who are maybe waiting for the next treatment to be invented. So in all areas we win if we change our way of thinking. The thing that people struggle with most is, how can we install the trust? How can we trust the results? And if we have another method to do that, that would be fantastic.
And I think I would really like to pick up on this again, what Richard is saying. So I think, again, the true deeper meaning of what we're trying to do is not validation, because validation is basically a process, right? We're using the word validation, but just because you do double programming doesn't make anything valid. Two things that are wrong are still wrong. They don't make them right. And in the same way, when you do a code review in software engineering, it's still possible that there are 3 people looking at it and you're missing the point completely. And it's not working the way you would expect. And it's and then, this might still not be what the user wants. And so I'm not trying to draw these comparisons to software engineering because I think they're the same thing. I actually think they're very, very different. So I spent half of my life in software engineering, half of my life in data analysis. So I know very much that they're not the same thing. I was just using them as an example to say there is a process that works there that I think can now be applied here. But to drive home this idea of trust, and actually we're interested in truth. We're not interested in validation or validation for validation's sake. And so how do you get to truth, and how do you use that to get to ultimate quality? I think, again, comes down to people actually understand what they're doing. And I love what Sunil was sort of hinting at, which is this idea that double programming changes the target in a way. It says, you have to get to some agreement, and you can get to an agreement without actually doing the right thing. And so what this review process, again, enables is it's not just training other people that are involved, but it's more intelligent eyes on the problem, reviewing, doing the deep thinking, saying, is this actually what we're trying to do? Is this actually what this model in the end needs? Because the big problems don't arise from like trivial programming mistakes. Like everyone can eventually spot them. You have logs and so on. The big problems that really hurt you, that really cost time, is if someone fundamentally didn't understand something deeper, let's say sensory rules, and then the implementation is wrong. It's actually I would argue it's much more rare that it's just an implementation problem. Usually when people understand what they're going for, they can figure out a way to implement it. And then if you have other people looking at it, they'll be able to say, look, like this is algorithmically incorrect and so on. But the problem is to have as many people be as highly skilled and have the transparency in a study and be able to quickly onboard so that they actually understand what the deeper truth is of what they're doing. How are things connected? What do they mean? Why are they defined that way? Why are they programmed that way? Because that is the stuff that ultimately get wrong results. It's not just about, the figure looking nice. The question is what's in the figure in the end. And it's oddly comparable actually to the problem of LLMs and AI, which is that it's actually fairly easy to produce something which looks right, but that is never the problem. The problem is always, is it correct? Is it actually what you mean to say? Is it the truth that you're going after?
Yeah. So what you're saying, Henning, is actually we are focusing too much on doing things right instead of doing the right things, isn't it?
Exactly, and it's this focus on a particular process, but that's one of the main critiques of the process itself, is that it makes you think about the process and what is the goal of the process. But that's not the point. The point is exactly what you said, which is you want to have the right things being analyzed in the right way to produce the right outputs. That is the actual problem that we're trying to solve. And like you said, what we need are tools that address that problem, not ones who are just focusing on, are we technically like doing the correct thing? That is part of it, but it's a sort of a lower tier problem.
Yeah. Plus, of course, you do a lot more than just looking at your programs, right? You look at the results of your, whatever is in your table. You compare that with other results in your trial and try to find out, do they make sense? And often, if you find mistakes, it's through exactly these comparisons that you find the mistakes.
And I'm really impressed with this. We've come to, depend on applications, technology to make things easier for us, to reduce the manual effort. So, for example, a simple thing like search and replace a text in a file. What I'm really impressed with the technology that's being provided here, again, revolutionary, is being able to convert code into metadata and tags and link the information. So what Henning's mentioning, we can actually trace down for any particular derived variable, extracting that code that's relevant for the derivation of the variable wherever that program resides in the macro, so that it's streamed together into one program. That's really intelligent use of the technology without having to manually go through that. And that really helps facilitate the confidence that we have in ourselves and others and showing the complete traceability. And that's not done manually. It's done through this technology, mainly because there's some intelligence there to link the related information, wherever it is across any of the files. And I think that greatly helps in the way that, we can ensure correct results.
Yeah. So maybe we, for the first time, have the ability to install this trust through this visualization of the the visual code traceability, for the first time gives us the ability to move away from double programming. I think that is something that will help.
So a question, and I want
agree.
And I want a yes or no here from everyone. In 10 years' time, will double programming still be the gold standard? Henning, yes or no?
No.
No?
No way.
Sunil?
No.
Well, okay. Dear listener, if you're listening to this, that's an emphatic no 3 times around. There will be people that disagree with that. So dear listener, please do so in the comment section, or either send us private messages if you're uncomfortable sharing those in public. Which sort of leads me to the other thing I want us to discuss. And I have strong opinions on this, because in software and generally in industry, especially at the enterprise level, you can have the best possible product that generally does things better. But if that product doesn't align itself to be adopted by a certain industry, in this case pharma, that product's not going to go anywhere. And that is both sort of the way the product it works, as well as how it's sold into that market. Now, without getting into marketing and sales theory for a tech company, I did want to sort of talk about a little bit on the community side. So we go to a lot of Fuse events, gosh, Fuse, I love Fuse. They even featured me in their end of year newsletter, which I love. Was so nice of them. Katie, one of their marketing assistants, she's lovely there. And I love what Fuse does. The only critique, if I could, of Fuse is that it's very much focused, or at least the people that are allowed to go there, which perhaps is not Fuse's issue, are usually just leaders, executives that are at these events. And usually you see the similar faces both on the vendor side, CROs, and the pharma side, which obviously, 95% of the industry consists of individual contributors that never get to go to any of these events. Yes, there are the SDEs, but the industry is too not concentrated in one location that you cannot have enough of these single day events to cover all of them. So I think the SDs are great. So it's not a critique necessarily of SDs itself. It's just that there needs to be a lot more of that. That's one of the reasons why we did our own 2 events last year, which we structured a little bit differently, but effectively the same approach. Now, if I guess from all of our experiences, you, Sunil, Richard, Henning, especially you coming from sort of more pharma, other parts of pharma, if one is a leader, you're a VP or a director of stat programming, statistics, whatever, how do you go about changing people's minds? Because, it's that old adage, you don't want to get fired. You won't get fired for buying IBM, but IBM being double programming here. What are your thoughts? And you've got a great quote, Richard. So let's start with you, Richard, because you got that great quote about innovation, not in my trial, but I'll let you say it.
Yeah, that is my experience when we started to do something differently, especially around standardization and being more effective in what we're doing. Very often the answer was, "Oh, that's fantastic! I really love it. Let's do this, but let's not do this in my trial because my trial is really special." And it's common. People are resistant to change, right? We all know this in all aspects of life. Basically, you have to show people where it can actually help them. So, someone who I reported to a long time ago said, it is selling something or making sure that there are changes. He called it the FBI principle, the facts, benefits, incentives. Right, so he said, okay, so you have this new Hoover, right, and you try to sell this new Hoover to whoever does the household in your house, right? So you say, okay, well, this is a new Hoover. The fact is, it has a really powerful motor, right? So that's the fact. The benefits is you can clean your house now twice as fast. But the incentive is in that time, you can start reading really good books or do something really nice. Yeah. So, and I think this is a little bit of, what we need to do also when we are talking about these processes, right? So what are the facts? What are the benefits? But also what are the incentives? Yeah. Many people see this as a threat, right? And taking that threat away is, I think, important if you want to implement new and sometimes very disruptive ideas.
Very interesting. I like your concept. I agree. My approach, I draw an analogy. As I mentioned, I've been in for 3 decades, and then R comes along. And so initially, just like Richard was saying, I was resistant. I was pushing it off. But what happens is, exposure. The more exposure that I'm seeing, the more interaction, talking with the industry leaders, the reason why they're making this transition. And by the way, this move of this open source wave that's going on, it's not an all or nothing. I talk with students and clients and organizations and said, we're not looking at, completing migration from SaaS to R, because obviously, as Richard mentioned, it could be a threat to what you built for 3 decades, but it's more along the lines of, okay, what does R have to offer? That maybe is already doing that I want to replace, or maybe more importantly, what does R add value? If I get into R, what value can I do, not, disrupt things that I've been comfortable doing with SaaS for all these years. And there's plenty of things that there are good reasons to, not necessarily replace things that you're doing with SaaS, but new things to do with R. The Pharmaverse is phenomenal. Never before in the industry, you have to collaboration amongst sponsors, PROs, and then industry leaders to develop packages specifically for our industry, it's impossible to ignore, because we're not just talking a handful, we're talking, growing number of packages that help us. And then the other thing is, for example, the Shiny apps. So this is a new innovative way that now, we have access, we do more things with the data, visual interaction and so forth. So I think that, change, nobody likes it, but the fact is change does happen around us, and it's better to, do the research, understand, and convince ourselves that this does make sense. And then, when we talk with others, we ask them what are their pain points. Do they really love SAS? Do they really want to continue with it, for example? Do they really want to continue with their programming? But in fact, does it really make sense? Talk with people who have thoroughly evaluated and ask them what was their reason for making the decision? How did they make that decision? It's not like an overnight thing, but maybe take a look at, studies that, have a little more time to really develop that in there. So I think, having a migration plan, because we talk a lot about this, going from SAS in various ways. So, those are my comments.
I mean, I think what I would throw in is just maybe the perspective of someone who was at Bayer, while I was at Bayer, exclusively done the things that people told me not to do, because it would be getting rid of IBM. And I was there for a long time. And I think the point is just that change always has obviously a lot of risk attached to it. So, most changes that you do and most new softwares that you try to introduce, often the benefits are sort of marginal, and you have to argue a lot, and the benefits come out after maybe you've adopted it and you've rolled it out across your entire organization. And so they're very difficult sometimes to introduce because everyone's used to the processes and so on. And so I think it's also fair to have a certain amount of resistance to this, because especially if you're in a big organization, and I know Richard knows this, is that you get emails nonstop about everything, and there's a solution for everything that works perfectly. And I'm sure this happens now all the time, especially with AI, because AI obviously knows everything and solves everything, and there's no problem anywhere left. And you also just get tired of this kind of stuff, and you don't want to take stupid bets on this, because it is also your reputation that you put on the line. The opposite of that, of course, is that if you do see something that is actually fundamentally changing something, and that is actually introducing significant positive change, then this is the kind of stuff also that in a large company you can build a career on, because you can then be the person who moves this into an organization, and you can actually introduce change. And the annoying things about large companies, everyone knows they're very big. You have to align with 200 people. Things take a very long time. The amazing thing about big companies is that if you manage to move these massive entities in any one direction, you can have an incredible effect. And so if you see something and you think it's, this could actually really, and you're honest with yourself and you look in the mirror and you say, this could actually introduce a massive change, and this could help us in a lot of different areas just fundamentally do things differently and better, then there really shouldn't be any reason for you not to do it. That's sort of why you're in that position. That's sort of why you're in that company. It's not just to just keep doing the same things. It's to keep doing the same things until you're sure that there's something better. And I think another thing that, obviously Tomás and I, we talked a lot about is that the hurdle to try this out needs to be very, very low. And so what we've done is to start with code, because sharing and trying out logs is actually not a big deal. It's extremely low effort, and you immediately get a lot of value. And then you can, once you understand that, very quickly see what the ultimate value would be once you connect it to data and to metadata and so on. You do that across many and multiple studies. So I think it's trying to give people an easy in to get a feeling for what it does, but also to see the opportunity. And the opportunity is not, it's bigger than all of us, essentially, right? If we find a way to help CROs do their job better, help pharmaceutical companies do their job better, and we get to deeper truth that ultimately benefits the people this is all about, which is all of us, the patients that need something, that need a treatment, but also regulators that are then able to more quickly review, again, benefit for everyone, for patients and for sponsors, and more accurately review, again, benefit for everyone, because, we're going to be the ones taking the drugs or trying the treatments if we need them. Then that is something worth investing in, and it doesn't matter really where you sit. So that's sort of my view also as someone who's been in corporate and now is on the other side. It's actually an opportunity for all of us, and everyone plays a role in this innovation. No matter where you sit, you play a role in this as a regulator, as a statistical programmer in a company, as a VP in a company. We're obviously playing a role because we're trying to build it, but it's an ecosystem, and all of this only works if the ecosystem is actually trying to move forward.
Yeah, as a good friend of mine wrote in an email not long ago, it says there's an opportunity in being early and there's a risk in being late in these things.
Interesting, and I totally agree with what Henning says. Saying the concept of low hanging fruit, it's a reality. I also have that when I'm training R, because there's several things that students and clients can benefit greatly from quick turnaround time. They can see some positive benefits. So I think low hanging fruit is definitely a very worthwhile effort. So.
And dear listener, I did want to emphasize Henning's approach at Bayer, if I can share. So my last company where I sold directly to Henning was my customer, by the way. I mean, you guys know this, but listeners don't. Henning was my customer. I sold him our database product, and Henning was so determined to buy it that, and back, it was some bureaucracy that Henning would text me on this messaging platform that if they don't buy it, I'm going to quit. And he was so determined, and yeah, he got it through the bureaucracy. But no, it is fascinating. So we have, and if you're listening to this and you're interested in trying it out, there is this weird sort of balance between taking that risk, being enabled by your organization or not, but still managing to get it through. It's a whole skill on its own, and it's something that doesn't get taught enough. I think the stuff that was said just now, I think maybe we should do a podcast just on that, on how to progress in your career within a big organization, because it's something that Henning especially has been speaking a lot, or we speak a lot between the two of us. Is there anything we haven't covered? Actually, yeah, I did want to shamelessly plug our product again, which is that if you we're devoting our lives on doing what we're doing right now, and there's a lot more stuff that we want to do. But if you want to check out what we're working on, the way to get started, as Henning said, we've made it really easy. Just upload your logs from your SaaS code onto the platform. Probably sign an NDA with us first, just FYI. Don't just upload it, and see what you get, and have a conversation with us, whether with Richard, with Sunil, and see what that means from a value perspective, and what that also means from a business case once we get into more commercial discussions. I think in the last part of the our description, I'd love to speak more specifically on what we're building right now. So maybe Henning, you can how do you say, start it off by sharing a little bit on our work, not just on the code traceability, on some of the modules that we're building. And then I'd love to get Richard's and Sunil's input on what that means for the life of a statistical programmer.
Yes. So there are two main sections in the platform now. One we would call the exploration section. So that's the explorer, and we have the validator. And the explorer now allows you to look at all of your outputs, all of your TLFs. They allow you to look at every individual variable in your SCTM and ADAM dataset. And you basically can, for each of these variables, you can see how they're derived. So this is what it's sort of a backward trace. We find all the code that contributes to the single variable across all of the programmers that you have. And we show you only the lines that contribute to a variable. So for example, instead of having to go through, 5 files and 5,000 lines of code, we show you only the 200 lines that are actually relevant for the derivation of that variable in a file, as if you had written it that way, which means that the speed of your review and understanding how something was done is just skyrocketed. So the feedback that we get from the people that we work with, also in phase 2 trials for complicated derivations, this saves them 95% of the time, which is one of those outrageous numbers that I'm still hesitant to say out loud, but this is what it is. You can look at and understand things in 30 seconds that that usually takes longer to start your SDE to even open the files, which you then have to go through. And so this is one part of it, which is looking at variables. And basically we have the explorer being mirrored in the validator, but we'll get to the validator in a second. So you can also review your code variable by variable when you do the validation process. The other part is that you can look at the results similar to the way that you can review variables. So you can see all the variables that contribute to a result. You can see what they look like at the stage of the raw data. You can actually look into the data if you share the data with us. You can see what it looks like on SCTM level. You can see what it looks like on atom level. You can see exactly how it goes into the TLF that then produces the output. We can show the actual output. So you have everything basically on one page, which is you see the output, you see the code that produced that, you can trace all of the code, and you also see the data at the various stages. And that just gives you a full 360 view of what the result is, how it was derived, what the data looks like. So again, this is just about making it unbelievably quick to spot issues. And really, there are only two possible issues, which is one, there's a problem in the data, or two, there's a problem in the code. And by putting both of them next to each other, it's very easy to spot which one it is. The second part now is the validator, which takes the same kind of idea, but it puts it into a process. And so the process, if you think about the process of validation, if you were to do it completely for a study, then what you want is to review how every single variable was derived. Because if they were derived correctly and their data is exactly what you would expect and it's clean, then those are correct. And in the same way, you want to review every single output, of course, every single TLF, because if they are showing the right data in the right way, then by definition, they show what they're supposed to show. And that is then the trust and the truth, as Richard was saying, that you would base your decision on, and you would confidently base it on that. So there are these two modules. One is called specification validation. So what that means is that you give us the specification for your SCTM and your atom, or you just tell us which variables are in which data sets that you want to review. You run through each one of these and review them and say either yes, they're good, or no, they're not good. And you can have as many reviewers for these as you want. If you find any issues, you create tickets. So we call them issues. And you can create these issues in specification validation or in results validation. They're all tracked across the whole platform. You can assign them to people who are then responsible for resolving the problems. And the issues themselves are sort of special issues in the sense that it's not just you writing down, hey, this could be a problem, but they are actually tied to exactly the point where you created the issue and where you saw the problem, which then makes it very easy for everyone else to also understand what the problem was, because you land on exactly that page, you see exactly that trace, and you have all of that information available. The other thing is that because we can integrate the code with the data, is that it's very easy to create reports for data management if you find issues in the underlying data that you have to communicate to them. And overall, this combination of specification validation, results validation, and then what we call the validation tracker, where you see all the issues, allows you to capture the whole thing in a process, in a new validation process, which is review-based, as we were saying, no longer dependent on double programming. And then basically, once you're confident that all of your specifications are properly implemented and all of your outputs are correct, and there are no issues remaining, you're done reviewing everything, and you would then have gained the confidence that everything that you've done is correct.
Wow, I'm impressed just listening and hearing everything that's being done, because I'm thinking of all the manual steps that need to be done, the human interaction to make sure things are being taken care of, the documentation, the tracking, because I know in my role as a consultant to clients, I may see these gaps, and then I may request, okay, where's the issues log? So I think from a programming point of view and wanting to leverage the language and technology, I think this is really a great holistic approach, planning, preparing for the best practices, but then also planning for issues that may happen and then creating and tracking those issues so that there's complete accountability. So I think that this is really in closing, not only, generating output, but making sure that the outputs are of quality and address everybody, all the stakeholders' issues that they may have, including, integrating with data issues. Many times those are, separate entities, separate islands, and different focus, but, we're all working toward the same common type of goal. So I'm impressed with everything that I'm hearing.
Yeah, so for me, what will change in the life of a programmer? I don't know any statistical programmer that says, "Yoo-hoo, I will do double programming today," but that goes away, right? And so that's the first thing. Other things are not, we haven't touched on that, but things that are also quite tedious is, for example, creating an integrated efficacy database or integrated safety database where you combine data of different studies. And yes, we have standards, and yes, we take care, but the devil is in the detail, and trying to figure out, where the differences are between the two studies and making sure that when you integrate these two studies, everything runs well. That is very, very tedious work. That the Verisian tools will help you mitigate that problem. I think that if you're able to work with these tools, it will actually advance your professional growth, because you can concentrate on topics that really matter rather than on solving problems.
Since Richard just introduced to the backdoor another use case, which is the whole pooling and harmonization, I just want to double down on the Explorer. Basically, what it does is it attacks exactly what Richard mentioned earlier, which is the onboarding. So imagine you're a programmer. So what changes in your life as a programmer? Imagine you get into a new study, and you would have this tool available where you could literally click on any domain that you're interested in, any variable, and you would immediately see exactly how it was done, exactly what the data looks like, exactly what the process data looks like. And you have, so for every code that we show what it looks like in your original file, what it looks like when the macros are all resolved. We show you exactly where it is in the logs. So you just get a 360 view of everything that you would want to have to understand it. So the Explorer is for that. It's getting familiar with the study, quickly looking something up. I don't know, maybe your VP asked you something like, how was this done again? Or you get an inquiry from the FDA or anyone internally. The validator obviously is for the validation process. But again, this is sort of the first few things that we're focusing on. So pooling will be another thing, because the fundamental question in pooling is how two different studies, really what you're asking is variable by variable, how similar are they? Like, can we actually pool them? Can we not? What if they are done differently, what is the right way of doing it now that we're harmonizing it? And all of this becomes immediately transparent, and you can make these decisions much, much faster. The other thing I wanted to throw in, because that's something, Sunil, that you also mentioned to me, and we actually had a nice session together looking at CDISC compliance check output, is that one of the things that drove me bananas about this was that you get these Excel sheets and there's thousands of messages, and Sunil, you showed me like how you classify them and so on. And this really bothered me because it's like the tool is supposed to help you, and it does in a way, because it gives you these long lists. So that's better than not having the list, but it sort of throws up on your desk, and then you're like, okay, what do I do now? But there's nothing that you can immediately action on. And so what we'll do is we'll provide an integration for this so that you can upload your Pinnacle 21 output or whatever tool that you're using for the compliance checks. And then all of those messages will be intelligently aggregated. So if they're basically the same thing, we don't show it 150 times. And we directly attach them again to the variables so that you can review your compliance checks alongside the content checks that you do through Verisian. And so the goal really is that you have one place where all of this is just together. And then also the P21 outputs, they become actionable, right? Because you see what the message is, you see which variable it actually is talking about, and you see exactly how this variable was derived. You see exactly what the data for this variable looks like. So there's no longer this, jumping across systems and trying to figure out what this means. And I remember very fondly, actually, a meeting I had with Sunil where we're like, well, this is going to take a long time to review everything. And this was way back when we had a very fundamental system up and running. It was nowhere as cool and sophisticated as it is now. And we ran through all of the output in like an hour. And it wasn't that we ran through it and then knew where to look for the problem. We actually ran through things having understood the problem, and we knew what I needed to do to fix it. So like the whole process just collapsed into a single hour of a review. And that's, again, something that we want to just provide to programmers, because it is such a pain to do it. It takes so much time. It is exhausting work. it's very boring work. Let's just be very honest. And it can be sped up incredibly. Again, to pick up the FBI idea, that's sort of one of the incentives. Like your mind isn't bogged down by this terribly boring stuff. You get help with that so that you can spend your time doing higher value things, doing maybe explorations, spend a little bit of extra time on how to do the pooling properly. That's the idea.
So, dear listener, if you want to learn more, there is a white paper available online. I should say we are recording this on the 12th of February 2025. As of today, it's actually not online, but I'm expecting it to be online when we publish this episode. And in that white paper, we go in detail about everything that we spoke about in this podcast, including the flaws that we see in double programming and where we would like to take the validation workflow. We try to be as opinionated as possible in terms of how we think everything should be. But we are also humble enough to admit where we're wrong. And again, this is a sensitive topic. If you have opinions, post them in the comment section or reach out to us privately. Before we drop off, Richard, and for those listening online, this is on YouTube as well. So I'm going to ask a question that you only will get if you watch the recording online. Is that Boston in the background of your screen, Richard? It does. I know the river doesn't go like that, but
no, it's not. It is Sydney, actually. It is Sydney.
Got it.
Yeah, we have, my wife and I have a very special connection with Sydney, so this is why it's Sydney.
Okay, very cool. I kept wondering, is that Cambridge up there? It sort of looks like Boston, but I still see
No.
where I thought it was some art, AI generated art.
No, it's not AI generated. It is actually a collage. So.
It's really beautiful. That's the reason. If you're listening to this on Spotify, watch the YouTube recording. It's a lot more fun to see us. Yes. Number one, not my face, everyone else's. Gentlemen, any final words? Anything you want to? Well, I can continue asking questions, by the way, for like another 2 hours. But I think this is a good moment just to take stock. I think you've all, because I would agree with that. So emphatically, we all say double programming is not going to exist in the next 10 years. So what that exactly means, we'll see. We're certainly trying to push for one direction, which we are very convinced on is the right one. And there are just a lot of things to consider, both not just in terms of what is the right process, but also how do we, as an organization, and how do leaders within companies implement those changes, and what that specifically means when it comes to incentives. And if you feel strongly about something, how do you affect that change in that organization? Any final words? Any points you want to leave our listeners with? Please interrupt me right now if you want to say anything.
I'll just say that, in this field, like myself and others, I'm excited to, work with people who are very passionate in this area. And, we like to get input across the board. So whatever level you are, from programmers all to the directors, the VP, getting input, what you like, what you're concerned about becomes very valuable. I know as I'm developing our curriculum, our course, I value the input from all levels, because any little bit helps to improve the process, improve the product. So that is incorporated. So please don't hesitate to share that with us. The common goal is to make things better and easier, and to address concerns that you may have.
No, so for me, in my career, I've seen very many changes, small changes for the better. But small changes also mean small effects. And maybe now is the time where we take a bigger step and change something more fundamental. And it may be disruptive, but I think that we really need to change the way we work. And working with you all has given me quite some perspective of how that change, what this change would look like. So thank you for that.
No, thank you, Richard.
I think the final thing that I want to throw in the mix is the point is that we have now a technology for which we are now presenting the first application that is directly influencing a process that everyone knows about. But as I mentioned, this is sort of the tip of the iceberg. So the technology has a lot of potential in a lot of other areas, which is just to say that there's a lot more work that can be done and that should be done that affects not just the validation or reviewing of things, but also generating code, for example, analyzing studies faster, maybe analyzing the different ways, integrating other data sources. All of these things are targets for what we're doing ultimately, because what we're doing with code traceability is that we're capturing the meaning behind the data. So if you just think about an Excel sheet and you look at a column and it says age, then you don't know what that age means. It could be literally the age of today. It could be the age of when the Excel sheet was done. In clinical trials, we all know it could be, the delta between the birth date and first dose. It could be all kinds of things. And there's no way for you to know. The only way for you to know that is if you know how it was calculated. Yeah. And that is exactly this traceability. And so imagine you have that information across all the studies you've ever done in a company, and imagine how much potential there is. So that's one part of the message. And the second one is basically picking up what Sunil was saying, which is that we are ultimately an ecosystem, and we all are working towards the same thing, which is we want to produce better, safer treatments for many diseases that are either addressed in a poor way or can be addressed better or are not addressed at all. This is what we're all working for. And so we welcome any kind of feedback. We are an ecosystem. We want to work together with you. And even if you have drastically opposing views, that is perfectly fine. This is how all progress works. We'd love to hear feedback. We'd love to integrate it. We'd love to get challenged. And of course, we'd love to work with you. So yes.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I think we should do this again. Let's see the response to this episode. But thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful rest of the evening for those in Europe. And Sunil, good morning to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tomás. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks to all the listeners as well.
Thank you.